Hello and welcome to our very important panel discussion directly affecting you who live in Bennington County. Hello, my name is Lawrence Zupan. It is my privilege today to moderate a panel discussion with our two distinguished candidates for the Vermont State Senate representing Bennington County, Meg Hansen and Mike Hall. I invite you to give us your close attention today to learn how these two Vermonters intend to serve your interests should the voters send them to Montpelier on behalf of Bennington County. Just to be clear, at the polls on November 3rd, you may vote for two candidates for the Vermont State Senate. So, if you like both Meg and Mike, don't be anxious. First, I would like to give each of our two candidates a couple of minutes to introduce themselves. Meg, would you like to begin, please?
Thank you, Lawrence. Hi, everybody. My name is Meg Hansen, and I'm running to represent Bennington County in the Vermont State Senate. I am a proud American citizen and a Vermonter with an Indian immigrant heritage. My personal and professional life has been rooted in underrepresented southern Vermont for the last decade. I learned the value of hard work and resilience at a young age. I strive to emulate my mother, who was a brilliant doctor, by serving my community with a balance of confidence and grace. I have the British equivalent of an MD, though I don't practice medicine, and I have years of experience leading a health policy think tank. As your next state senator, I will use my medical education and in-depth knowledge of Vermont's hospital and health insurance systems to guide a successful post-COVID recovery for our local economy and health care. Our campaign's motto is small towns and big hearts, because that's who we in Vermont are. I am running to bring economic prosperity for Vermont families and workers. Now, prosperity does not only mean financial abundance, it means the ability to create the lives that we want for ourselves and our families. It is no secret that the Vermont legislature champions laws that disproportionately benefit Chittenden County. We deserve new and dynamic voices representing our interests in Montpelier. Bennington County deserves a state senator who is focused on the unique needs of our communities. As your next state senator, I will support policies that will build a prosperous and resilient future for all. I ask for your vote in the November 3rd general election. Thank you.
Thank you, Meg. And Mike, may we hear from you next?
Sure, thanks again. My name is Mike Hall, and I'm running for the position of Senator for Bennington County. I'm a native Vermonter. I was actually born and raised in the Manchester area. I feel that I can represent Vermont as their senator for Bennington County that would benefit all the residents of Bennington County plus the state of Vermont in general. And I say that based upon the fact that I come from a blue-collar background, and I've had, by way of my various experiences in different jobs, I've had experience working in the automotive and engineering field, as well as spending nearly 40 years in law enforcement. And during that 40 years of law enforcement, of course, I work across the spectrum of every social economic range that you can imagine, from folks that basically just own the clothes on their back and nothing else, up to CEO executives. And I think that really gave me a very clear perspective as to what the true needs are of the people here in Vermont. Vermont has come a long ways over the last 30 or 40 years in many ways, but in some ways it's actually gone backwards. And when I say that, as a native Vermonter, it has always been somewhat of a struggle to maintain a decent quality of life here, but we did it and we enjoyed it, and that was the trade-off for the things that we've come to like here in Vermont at the time. Low crime, basically low pressure, not a lot of pressure on people to do things in a different time frame. And now here we are today, where most native Vermonters, people who were born and raised here, are having an extremely hard time keeping their head above water. And a lot of that has to do with the cost of government in and of itself, as well as the failure, I believe, of the legislature to really pay attention to the people that make up the state of Vermont. The majority of the people that are here in the state of Vermont either were born here or came here because they like what we have. They like the lifestyle, they like the freedom, and they like the open spaces and that sort of thing. We're taxing ourselves out of house and home here, and as a native Vermonter, I can tell you that the standard of living for the average working class Vermonter isn't as good as it was 25 or 30 years ago. We should be moving forward in that direction, not in behind. And with that, you know, I would say that the people and the folks in the Manchester, Dorset area, you know, they entrusted their safety with me under my watch for nearly 40 years, several years of that as chief of police. The folks there know that I'm always going to do the right thing at the right time for the right reasons. And with that, I'll continue to do that public service in Montpelier as your state senator. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. And now we turn to the questions for our two candidates. Mike, I'd like to begin with you. I'd like to say, what are the key issues surrounding Vermonters' needs that you would like to address in Montpelier?
Sure. I think the first and foremost key issue that we need to address right at the present time in the state of Vermont overall is where we're going to be economically. We're well aware of the fact that the state is in financial difficulty between the pension funds, the unfunded pension funds, the college systems, and a number of other areas where the state is simply broke or almost out of money. I think we need to, first and foremost, get a true, clear understanding exactly what the liabilities are that we as Vermonters have out there. We need to know how much money we owe before we can figure out how we're going to pay that, how we're going to meet those obligations, and what kind of sacrifices are going to have to be made in order to achieve that. Secondly, the thing that we need to look at is, how did we get here? What caused this situation? And, you know, you could probably talk to a number of different people and get a number of different ideas, but what I can tell you as a native Vermonter, I think I have the answer to that. We've chased away our businesses. We've chased away the businesses that pay excellent and high standards of wages that sustain people that can afford to buy houses, properties, and run businesses. And, you know, we've lost the opportunity to keep those businesses here, and they've gone elsewhere. So we need to take a look at what we need to do to turn that around and to once again become the place where businesses want to come because they can relocate here. And Vermonters are good workers. Vermonters are known for their hard work and ingenuity, so it's not going to be a problem with that. And so if we can get back on track with our financial status, which is first and foremost, and then try to rebuild our business structure within the state to get some good paying jobs back here that'll afford the type of wages needed to have a family and own a house and that sort of thing. And then, of course, the final thing is the whole healthcare situation, which I really would have to have a lot more information than what I currently have right now. But what I can tell you is that when a person pays as much for healthcare coverage as what they would work making a minimum wage job, so you could work a minimum wage job, take that entire paycheck that you got every week and pay that to a health insurance company with nothing left to have for any other expenditures, something's wrong. We need to figure out what that is. And if that means opening up our insurance market to different entities, different companies, whatever has to be done, but we cannot sustain the rate that it's costing Vermonters for insurance at the present time. So those three issues, I think, are paramount and need to be addressed immediately in Montpelier.
Thank you, Mike. Meg, did you want to comment on the key issues questions surrounding Vermonters?
Yes, thank you, Lawrence. I agree with Mike. Very, very good points there. So I would look at the economy as number one, healthcare and education as the three areas that I would like to champion policies that increase freedom, increase choice. So as far as the economy is concerned, Vermont has a structurally weak economy, which is really burdened by a lot of regulations and a lot of red tape. This is the reason why we don't have, as Mike said, good paying jobs or upwardly mobile jobs. A lot of people talk about income inequality, but what about income mobility? The fact of the matter is that the vast majority of middle class families are falling out of the middle class into lower income brackets. And so when we look at young people, I'm in my mid-30s, so is my husband. When we look at young people, when we look at families, when we look at the future generation, and we see what is the work landscape like in Vermont, unfortunately, there really isn't a sustainable future for us. And so this is tied to the lack of diversity in terms of what the business environment looks like, a lot of regulations, and the lack of upwardly mobile jobs. So I would say definitely cutting down on the overregulation, opening up and diversifying our economy so that we have different kinds of businesses of all sizes and creative entrepreneurship flourish. And then opening up the meaning of labor. We need access to different kinds of productive labor. So the trades, investing in secondary and post-secondary programs in the trades, and enabling more Vermonters to become entrepreneurs. I think these are great ways to take care of our economic situation and pave paths where we can build lives that are prosperous and resilient. Healthcare is also a very important thing, and as we see with COVID, we are talking about a post-COVID recovery. I would urge all of us to think about moving from recovery to resilience, because these kind of things will happen again. We'll have a pandemic again, we'll have a hurricane again. We need to have strong, stable communities, healthy communities that are able to withstand the onslaught of some unexpected disasters. So I would look at it two ways. Health insurance, as Mike said, bringing down the cost of health insurance, and there are many ways to do that in terms of policies that we can enact if we are elected representatives, whether in the House or in the Senate. And then the other one is increasing access to high quality, affordable, and innovative health services. For that to happen, we need to cut down on the rationing of services that is right now taking place, unfortunately, under the all-payer model, which many people in government are promoting. So I won't get into the weeds of it, but there are clearly paths to increase access to healthcare and decrease healthcare costs. And finally, education. I think this is even more important now because of COVID and how that has affected our ability to send our children to schools. In Bennington, as we see the school district, we have only remote learning, so there's no in-person learning. What are the questions that come up because of childcare? What if you are not able to work remotely as a parent? Even if you're working remotely, how productive can you be with your children and running around? There are all these questions that I think becomes very important to, as a state senator, to champion policies to support laws that empower both parents and students to maximize K through 12 learning outcomes. And if this means giving subsidies or other ways to support parents who want to homeschool, expanding school choice to everybody who wants it, finding ways with broadband and 21st century learning, it doesn't have to just be broadband, it could be satellite, it could be just the new technologies that, as I said, maximize learning outcomes. So these are the three areas that as a state senator I would certainly focus on.
Now, Meg, you've touched on, and it's become clear, your expertise in the healthcare field, given your training, your background, your association with the think tank that you managed. Could you talk a little bit about the COVID situation in terms of how we keep Vermonters safe and healthy while still ensuring our hospitals and physician practices are financially stable?
Thank you, Lawrence. That's an excellent question, and this is something that we should all be grappling with. Now that we've had several months of data understanding this new coronavirus, this novel coronavirus called COVID-19, we should use this scientific data to formulate our public policy accordingly. As such, I do not support a one-size-fits-all approach moving forward. The data clearly shows that elderly and those with chronic pre-existing conditions are the at-risk populations. So our number one priority should be to prevent, minimize the risk of transmission with these at-risk populations. For everyone else, the fatality rate, for example, for those under the age of 70 is 0.04%. For children and teenagers, it's practically zero. And this is not just these statistics are not just about, hospitalizations and deaths, but also asymptomatic transmission. It's very, very low when it comes to children under the age of 18. So when you look at that, as I said, number one, what we should really focus on is preventing outbreaks in, let's say, nursing homes, where we have a concentration of elderly. Focusing our resources on that. As far as everybody else is concerned, there has to be a step-by-step opening up of our economy and including resuming schools to a fully operational manner. There are many risks that are associated by keeping our economy continued lockdown and keeping our schools closed. There are public health consequences of doing that. So I would say that, using our data to formulate our public policy in this way moving forward, so we can still take precautions to make sure that other people don't fall sick. But the good news is that the new positive COVID-19 cases are not happening with the at-risk populations. So I'll just say this one thing, that when we're thinking about COVID-19, we should look at the number of new hospitalizations and deaths, not the number of new positive cases. We have to look at the statistics that way and then move away from panic into, as I said, recovery and then resilience. How do we help? The second piece of that is, how do we help make sure that our hospitals are financially stable? Well, even before COVID hit, Vermont's hospitals were teetering on bankruptcy. So the all-payer model, it's complicated. I won't get into the weeds of it, but it has not shown, it was supposed to bring down costs and improve the quality of care. It has not done any of that. There are worsening healthcare indicators. That means most Vermonters are doing worse off. There are increased waiting lines, lower usage of primary care physicians and specialists. So it's not done the benefit. It hasn't shown any benefit to Vermonters, but instead it has actually made the healthcare costs worse. So moving away from that model and trying to do things like increase our healthcare capacity. So have more access to, let's say, MRI, CT scans. We can do that by getting rid of monopoly creating laws and regulations that are currently in place. And the second part would be investing in a more community-based approach, so we can have community health centers that are focused on increasing access to primary care in underserved, medically underserved areas like Bennington County, rural parts in southern Vermont. So this is how I would say to move forward.
Thank you. Now, regarding COVID-19 recovery, did you want to follow up with any comments on that, Mike?
Well, I think first and foremost, in the recovery phase, one of the things that we need to pay close attention to is taking care of the existing businesses. And, this thing's dragged on a little longer than what I think any of us would have thought that it was going to take during the initial stages. And every day that goes by, I feel like we tend to risk more of a chance of losing more and more of our businesses. So with that, I think it's very important that we do everything that we can to support the existing businesses that we have and to make sure that they're there to go back to once this cloud of darkness passes over us. Again, I think a lot of it is going to depend on what the end result is, how much longer this goes. But the thing that concerns me, in addition to the recovery, is the future expense. I mean, we're spending a lot of money at the federal level, and there's not a whole lot of talk about that right now because, quite frankly, most people are kind of, satisfied that the federal government's throwing some money at us. That's our money, folks. Whether it's being distributed back to us through the states via unemployment or however the case may be, those are your tax dollars. And that concerns me, is we've taken on a tremendous amount of additional debt on a national level, in addition to what we already have on a state and a local level. And sooner or later, the bill's going to come in the mail for that. So, you know, I am of the mindset that we should really be putting the brakes on any expenditures outside of whatever is COVID-19 critical at this point, and not take on any more debt or any more obligations until we get a clear understanding where we're at coming out of the backside of this.
Thank you, Mike. Now, Meg, you've touched on the economy already in some of your comments, and we know that the economic reality and the economic picture is sort of paramount to moving forward and upward for our whole state, not to mention Bennington County. But let me ask you, what can and should our state senators do to help create upward economic income mobility?
So, as I said in my opening statement, this is one area that has been on my mind a lot, and that is our 17 communities here in Bennington County and Wilmington, which is also part of the Senate district. We have our own unique needs and interests, which may or may not tie into that of other parts, especially the Northwest. So when we have representation at the House level and our 2 state senators, it is important that our elected officials who are representing us prioritize policies and efforts that are focused and that benefit our local needs. So I can tell you that, you know, when it comes to the proportion of elected representatives in Montpelier, there's a large number from Chittenden County, and so the policies are very much Chittenden County or Burlington centric focused, and so as a result, you know, because that's sort of where the power nexus is, a lot of state senators, House representatives want to be a part of that. And I believe that our state senators should not be leading the charge on policies that end up hurting us. Rather, you know, we should look at the economic realities of it and weigh the impact on our communities, and then you know, make a decision accordingly. So one thing that comes to my mind is the Global Warming Solutions Act, and this was passed by the legislature, in fact, with a veto-proof majority in both chambers. But last night, Governor Phil Scott vetoed it, and I've looked at it, and you know, this is really not about you know, climate change or what the particular bill does, but rather looking at the economic realities of it. And when I look at middle-class families, when I look at the working poor in Bennington, in many of our rural communities here in our county, this is bad news, because it means that we are just going to increase the cost of electricity and make it even more difficult to afford to live here in Vermont. So this is what we should not do. And to actually answer your question, what should we do? It's the same things that I said before. We have to look at income mobility, so creating upwardly mobile jobs, and that starts with expanding the definition of work, so investing in the trades, specialized skills, helping with entrepreneurships. There's a great entrepreneurship initiative here, you know, in association with the Bennington County Regional Commission and the Community College. The Southwestern Medical Center, for example, is doing an apprenticeships, scholarships for nurses. So these are ways in which we can invest in secondary and post-secondary level apprenticeships, internships, and create new jobs. I think one of the main things is to just get out of the way and allow, you can have public and private partnerships, but mostly the private sector, which is really anemic, you know, give it wings, you know, allow it to create opportunities, different kinds of opportunities. And one way that we can get rid of that is by cutting over regulation. There's a lot of regulation that comes in the way, and this doesn't mean a free-for-all and have a deregulated society. No, when regulations shackle economic growth and development and these kinds of opportunities that we need, that's when we can have our state senators step in and modify or reform existing regulations to cut down that burden and allow entrepreneurship, business, upward mobility when it comes to jobs to really flourish.
Thank you, Meg. Unsurprisingly, Mike, Meg touched on a couple of subjects there and talking about income expansion and upward mobility. Naturally, the subject of the Global Warming Solutions Act came up. I know that this is something that you've thought about a bit. Could you address both of the issues, both income security and income upward mobility for income, and also state your opinion about this Global Warming Solutions Act, which the governor vetoed last night?
Sure. Well, one of the things that I think's happened in the legislature over the last number of years is that they've lost their way insofar as what their true responsibilities and objectives are. And, you know, as a state representative or as a state senator from Bennington County, I see my position as your elected official, if you're so kind to elect me, to represent your interest. I'm not there to advocate or be a lobbyist for any particular special interest group unless that particular special interest falls into the category that is of main concern and interest to you. I've had the opportunity to see where Vermont has gone since the beginning of Act 250 until it is where it is today. So when I hear about the loss of jobs and upward mobility and the likelihood of people getting ahead in the state of Vermont, I can tell you point blank, the cause of that was Act 250. And I tell people Act 250 was the kiss of death to the state of Vermont. I was a young man when that went into play, and I've seen nothing but a vacuum leaving the state of Vermont since then. And what happens with that is that this was initially designed to keep large conglomerates from coming into Vermont and buying up large tracts of land and developing it and making, you know, the town of Wilmington into a suburb of Boston or Manchester a suburb of New York City. And the intent was to put the brakes on this rapid fear of expansion. Well, what happened over time was that thing morphed into something that I don't think it was ever intended to be, but is a bureaucratical nightmare where, you know, Vermont has a reputation of being business unfriendly. And I know people personally that have gone through Act 250 processes and spent tons and tons and tons of money. And what I will tell you is that the very thing it was designed to prevent has created. And one of the reasons why you don't see businesses expanding in Vermont anymore is because if I want to expand my business and I've got some guy that lives across the street that maybe for whatever reason doesn't want it to happen, that one individual can tie this thing up for quite a while in the courts. What I think we need to do is Vermonters have always been known for wanting to have, you know, their right to govern themselves. And I think what needs to happen with Act 250 is that thing needs to be thrown out, recreated with something else, give more control back to the local people that live in those communities and the counties that are going to be the ones that decide what's going to happen. And the other thing is that as much as we don't like it, we need to have a system where the rules are clear, you know where you've got to be, you know what you've got to do. There is no one out there that can tell you what you've got to go through to get an Act 250 permit until you're in the process. And then they'll tell you what you'll need, and then you'll get that, and they'll have something else, and then you'll get that, and it'll be another thing. So, you know, we need to get a situation where if I want to build something, this is what I need, this is what you need to have, and when I have it, I know I'm going to get that permit, and I'm going to be able to build that building. Not fight with somebody because, you know, like the Costco in Rutland's fighting with the guy up there that can't open a gas station. He's a competitor. Of course he doesn't want him to open. You know, that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. Now, if we can cut through all that red tape and nonsense and have a system where people know what they need to do and move forward, you know, and I'll give you an example, this Global Warming Solution Act. As a police officer, I read the law. When I arrested somebody, I knew the law, I knew the case law, I knew pretty much everything I needed to know. And I've read that, and I got to tell you, that's a nightmare. And if anybody tells you it's not, they're being less than honest with you. You're going to have a situation where you're going to be handing off your right to have people like your state senators respond to what you want by way of creating these little commissions and these little pods of people that are going to sit around and drink tea and decide what you're going to be paying for tax on every gallon of fossil fuel that you have. That's what we're talking about. You're not going to have the ability, and they're going to tell you you do, but trust me, you won't. And if you don't believe me, did they come and ask you whether or not they could add a Nash borer fee onto your light bill? Nobody asked you that. Nobody asked you if Efficiency Vermont could up the ante on your light bill. That's what I'm talking about. And that's what these people are going to do. When they create these commissions, you are handing your write-off as a taxpayer to somebody who may not even be a taxpayer to be setting the bar. And we need to be very careful of that. And I'll tell you, the legislature loves this because the legislature, I've dealt with these guys up there. They look for a way to get things done without having to be personally held accountable. And this is how they do this, is they pull these, I call it a sham because that's what it is. You're going to get that, they get their piece of the pie, their action, they'll play with it over here, and you're going to be footing the bill. Thank you.
You know, Mike, I think in the last few minutes you may have partially or largely answered the next question I'm about to ask you, but I'm going to ask you it anyway. And that is, why, Mike, should voters choose you for the Senate position, and what makes you the best choice for the position? And if you care to contrast yourself with your opposition, please feel free to go ahead.
Sure. Well, let me tell you, I spent 40 years in law enforcement, and during that 40 years, again, I always did the right thing in my mind for the right reasons. And if you elect me to be your senator, I'm going to go up there and I'm going to represent you for what I think is in your best interest. Am I going to be popular? No, I'm not. Because I'm going to tell you, anybody that knows me I will tell you that if you ask me what I think on something, I'm going to tell you. And if it makes sense, I'm not a bullhead. I will listen to what you've got to say. But if you're going to try to pull a fast one on me, it ain't going to happen. Okay? And I look out for the taxpayers of the state of Vermont if I'm elected to this position. And, you know, the bottom line is with this is that we've lost our way in this country as far as what politicians are supposed to be. Politicians are representatives of the people. They're not a lobbyist for some environmental group. They're not a special interest advocate. They're up there to represent you as a taxpayer. And the one thing that I've heard since I started my campaign is those people in Montpelier have no idea what's going on at the local level. And you want to know something? They're right. Because it's been a long time since one of those people walked in your shoes. I've walked in your shoes, and I don't mind walking in your shoes because I've been there, and I'll do it any day of the week. And I pride myself on being a blue-collar Vermonter, and that's what you'll have, but one with common sense if you send me to Montpelier.
Thanks, Mike.
Yep.
Gee, this would be a great question for Meg to answer, too. I'd say, Meg, would you like to share with the voters why they should choose you for the Senate position, and what makes you the best choice for the position?
Before I answer that, I just want to say what an honor it is to be running in the same race with Chief Mike Hall. Really, really inspiring. And, you know, it's really the let's say, blue-collar Vermonters. Many of them who were born and raised here, who I see as salt-of-the-earth people that drew me to Vermont politics, that, you know, so many that don't have a voice, that feel that they're not heard and not represented, that they're so silenced all the time. You know, my great passion is, you know, I love writing and speaking. My great passion, my great draw is to fight for every Vermonter who feels unheard. And so this was really my entire ethos. So having said that, I'll say that, you know, 2020 has been a very, very unusual year, and it continues to be one. With COVID, with a lot of political divisions, a lot of tension, there's a call for renewal, there's a craving for something new, something different. So I feel that too. I believe that 2020 should be the year that we have new voices, dynamic, bold vision, a new fire in our spirits to bring about lasting and meaningful change. And if you know my background, you know that I've had a very unique, some would say unusual life experience. I would definitely bring diversity in terms of geographic diversity. Of course, my own heritage, being a woman, being under 40. And these are not identity politics. All I'm saying is that by virtue of being all these things, I would have a different perspective to the table that I'm sure will help formulate policies that are inclusive and that speak to everybody. So I would say that. The second I would say is my medical background, especially now as we are in a public health crisis and we want to recover. I think having somebody who has a medical degree, who has years of health policy experience and knows what's going on with Vermont's complicated health insurance and hospital systems, I think that's a real benefit that I could bring to serve Vermonters here in Bennington County. And finally, I'll say that we need change, not for the sake of change, but we need change that is in keeping with the times. And as Mike said, a lot of people feel that once you've been in Montpelier for a couple of terms, you get into those little cliques, and then you're sort of playing politics and trying to go up the career ladder. Fall into the power nexus of Chittenden County, and you tend to forget the concerns of everyday Vermonters from the district that you represent. So I personally believe that if we don't have term limits, then it's up to the voters to bring new voices and bring change and fresh representation at regular intervals. And so I hope to represent that change and bring that diversity and inclusivity by representing Bennington County in the Vermont Senate.
Thank you, Meg. And again, you touched on some of the medical issues, and one of the medical issues that has receded into the background because of COVID, but which is a very big reality in our current culture, is the opioid epidemic, I would call it, the addiction epidemic. COVID has monopolized the news cycle since March. But before that, we were very much trying to deal with consciously and out loud the opioid addiction problem. How have Vermont families and local communities been dealing with this ongoing culture of despair and addiction caused by opioids?
It's very sad that the focus has shifted. I don't see why we can't report on COVID as well as keep everyone abreast with the number of deaths that we're seeing because of the opioid epidemic. I've seen statistics and reports showing that it's actually worsened because of the widespread isolation that a lot of people are feeling. We've seen the rates of suicide, depression skyrocket, especially with teenagers, and associated with that is opioid abuse. And so I think that we can look at it in terms of recovery and rehabilitation, and I think Vermont has good structures in place for that. But I'm more concerned with looking at the broader picture and understanding the social aspect of it, because when you look at addiction, my understanding is that its root is a void, a spiritual void. There's a social matrix where there's something missing, connection is missing. And so as you said very nicely, the culture of despair and a culture of addiction that has consumed so many of our families and towns. So how can we remedy that? Well, I firmly believe in the power and dignity of labor. I think work outside of personal relationships, work gives us access to being a part of something that is greater than ourselves. It connects us with other productive individuals, and it gives us a shared sense of purpose. It helps us contribute back to society. And so, as we've talked about in this discussion, when we don't have an economy that supports diversified jobs, upwardly mobile jobs that allows us to engage in that kind of productive labor, that's really where we're seeing people slip, and we're seeing this meaninglessness and this nihilism, this despair pervade our society. So I would say that what can you do? Well, one thing is that when we look at economic policies, to always look at the social dimension of it. So I'm not a free market absolutist. I don't believe in just looking at the economic aspect. I think it's really important to see what are the consequences of all the policies that we put forward. What are the consequences on the psyche of the people, on the structure of our families, especially our young people. And so as long as it's positive, we should go forward with that. But when you want to serve a particular lobbyist or an ideology like the Global Warming Solutions Act, which does do nothing about climate change actually, this kind of stuff, all it does is makes it harder for the working poor, for middle class families to survive. And you know, think about the psychological burden, think about the psychological damage and the consequences that causes when you don't have work, when you're struggling to put food on the table. Think about how it strains and frays personal relationships, and how it, you know, how more and more of us are you know, sort of sinking into isolation and despair and depression. And so I would say that looking at the social consequences of whatever policies we champion, that I would hope to champion as state senator, to have a positive and uplifting social impact. That's how I would say to move forward.
Thank you so much, Meg. And on this issue of opioid addiction, I know Chief Hall, you've had some very first-hand encounters as someone trying to intervene to save people's lives at the point where they were either about to lose them or did lose them. And I know you must have a unique perspective on the opioid addiction problem. Would you share a little bit about your views on it?
Sure. Well, you know, somebody coined the phrase early back during the initial explosion of the opioid epidemic, and they said, we're not going to arrest our way out of this situation. And, you know, I've been criticized by some people because one of the things that I said was, when that first started, the first thing I did is I really went out and educated myself as to what opioid addiction was. And it's not unlike any other addiction, whether it be gambling or whether it be, you know, any other addiction that a person has. It's a malfunction of a person's brain in the sense that they can't stop doing what they're doing. So when I actually talked to some people that were opiate addicts early on, and I listened to what they said, and I came back from that and I said, we have two solutions here when we encounter these folks. Jail or rehab, one or the other. If you want these people to be alive, you either got to lock them up so they can't get the drugs, or you're going to have to get them into rehab. I'm not for locking up sick people, never have been. If they're mentally ill, they have an addiction, our judicial system, our jails should not be used as a punitive system against people that are sick, whether it be physically or mentally. So what I've seen with this is that we've done the Band-Aid approach, we've done kick the can approach, and this goes back even prior to the current governor. What we need for true opiate addiction treatment for these people is they need to have supervision and oversight. You can have an opiate addict or a heroin addict or whatever you want to call them, and you can have them, you can put them on Suboxone, you can put them on the legalized version of heroin, you can do whatever you want to do. But until you get somebody that's almost tethered to them as a coach, as a person that's going to be looking over their shoulder every minute, because these people are only one step away from falling off the wagon. And the dangerous thing about what we're facing now is these people aren't dying of opiates anymore. They're dying of fentanyl. They're dying of fentanyl poisoning or some concoction that somebody in China is cooking up and sending over here. The profit margins are extraordinary. And I can tell you, if there's one thing that haunts me from my career in law enforcement, is having to have personally talked to 3 different families who came to me back when I was a police officer patrolling the street and as a chief of police, and saying, Mike, help me. My kid's got this drug problem, and you know what? I did everything I could. And guess what? 3 of them had been buried. And let me tell you something. I take that seriously as the guy that they came to looking for help. And I failed them, not so much as a police officer. We failed them as a society. We didn't do what we should have done, and we're still not doing it. And they're not kids, people. Some of these people are in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and older. I tell people, you're playing Russian roulette with 5 in the chamber and 1 empty, because the drug that you took yesterday is going to kill you tomorrow. Because the drug is, they're not weighing this stuff out. They're not really keen on too much of quality control. And the problem is that we haven't addressed it, you know. And until you've had that demon in your house, so to speak, you don't have any idea what it is. And thank goodness I haven't had the opiate demon, but I've had other demons, and I kind of know what these folks are going through. But what I'm saying to folks is, you know, we've got a law in the state of Vermont that says if a police officer gets somebody with, you know, this overdose, we give them Narcan, we've saved them. Greatest thing that happened as far as law enforcement was that we could intervene and save lives. And I'll tell you, when we first started doing that, you know, I had people say to me, well, you shouldn't be giving them Narcan, just let them die. No, that's not what we do. We're here to save lives. I don't care whether the guy is a drug addict or a criminal. Our job is to save lives. These people are sick. But I'll tell you, where we fall down on that is we go and we give them Narcan. We get them back. They come back. It's a miracle if you've ever seen it. They come back. Sometimes we have to do it twice. Sometimes we have to do it more than once because they've got so much of this in their system. But what happens is, okay, they get all cleaned up. They basically brush themselves off, thank the officers, thank the rescue squad, walk off the scene. That's not the way it should be, folks. There should be a law in the state of Vermont that if a police officer or EMT or anyone revives a person on Narcan, immediately, at a minimum, they should make a trip to the hospital. They should be going to the hospital where they can get the people that know what the hell they're doing to take a look at these folks and say, this person needs to go in for mental health treatment or whatever. That's not going to cost us any more money than it is to keep paying us to go around that. So, yeah, I mean, we could solve that problem, or at least help solve that problem very easily by just changing a few laws.
So Mike, along the issue of law enforcement and the stability and peace in our country, no doubt we've all noticed that our country is currently in turmoil, experiencing riots and civil unrest, primarily or allegedly over police actions and racial matters. What's your take on exactly what is going on with this rioting and half of the state of Oregon seemingly in being burnt down, if not by forest fires, by people burning them down?
Well, I don't think there's any question that, you know, there's a lot of people in the country that are upset with some of the things that have taken place along the terms of what the police have gotten involved in. And one of the things that I think is a major factor in that is the inaccuracy of the reporting by the news media. And, you know I'm going to have people say, oh, you know, he's just sticking up for the cops or whatever. You know, I spent 40 years in that business, and I can tell you during that time, we had probably, that I can think of, 2 or 3 people that shouldn't have been in the profession, and guess what? The profession got rid of them. They got them out of the system. The average cop out there on the street does not want to work with somebody that is, you know, racially biased, that mistreats or mishandles prisoners. I'm going to tell you right now, if I as a police officer ever witnessed another officer slapping somebody around while they were in handcuffs, there'd be 3 people fighting before it got over with, and I'd be one helping the other guy knock the hell out of the cop, because that's not how you do things. And, you know, we've kind of educated the young people into thinking that that's how cops behave, and that's not really how it is. And I think a lot of it has to do with, you know, you're getting one side of the story and not even the real story. And I'll tell you right now, the George Floyd thing, which is where all this started, I said early on that, you know, this is not, what that officer did wasn't correct, and I'm not saying he was, but I always thought that there was probably more to the story, and it now appears that maybe this gentleman had actually died of a fentanyl overdose, which, if in fact that's the case, and I'm not saying it is because I don't have the facts, but if it is, then that'll change things a little differently. Does it justify putting his head on his knee, on his neck? No, it doesn't. But the other thing is that this thing has taken itself from that one incident and spread out to, you know, police can't do, you know, neck restraints and chokeholds. And you're not going to hear most people talk about it because most cops are afraid to say anything publicly, but I'll tell you point blank, neck holds and chokeholds and neck restraints are what saves police officers' lives, and it also saves other people's lives. I can show you video after video after video of counters of agencies where they have those restrictions, and Vermont has those restrictions now, where you cannot use a carotid hold, you can't use a neck hold to take somebody down. That is going to result in more officer shootings, more officers' death. And the reason why is because you've taken more tools off my tool belt. The more things you take off my tool belt to work with, the sooner the officer has to go to deadly force. And the is a knee-jerk reaction that needs to be changed. And hopefully once people kind of get settled down a little bit, we can go back to having a rational conversation about what is appropriate police use of force. You got people out there that actually think that you're going to have civilians out there mediating resolutions to things on the street. I got news for you people. You've been watching too much TV or taking too many drugs, because that's not how it works. When things go sideways out on the street out there, it's a street fight, and that's what it is. And the best guy's going to win. And, I'm not here to advocate police force or anything like that. I'm just telling you the way it is. And, one of the best things that I tell people to do, if you're afraid of the police, do as you're told. That's all you got to do. If you've got an axe to grind with the police, that's what our court systems are for. And if the police are wrong, you're going to pay money. They're going to pay you money. You're not going to fight this out on the street and win this thing. That's not how it's supposed to be. That's why we have a court of law and a process. And I would just encourage people, stop listening to all the side crazy stuff that's coming out from the news media, because so much of it is not true. And, I was a police officer for 40 years. I put my pants on every morning just like everybody else does. I've got all the same issues that you've got, all the same issues that my neighbor has. We all suffer from the same kind of things in our lives. The only thing is we do a different job. And most of them, 99%, are decent, hard-working guys. And the other, 1/10 of 1%, we don't want them either. So, just stop believing all the nonsense that you're being fed by the media on some of this stuff.
Thanks, Mike. Meg, did you have any comments you wanted to make
I'd
about
like to
the
add,
continuing?
Yes. Thank you, Mike. That was great. Bad actors exist in every sphere of life, and so accountability is critical. Upholding the rule of law is critical, and I think that this trend to paint everybody with the same broad brush, that's unfair. And whether it's all police officers being villainized, whether it's any entire demographic of people being demonized, I don't subscribe to that kind of mindset, and I think that nobody should. Our culture should be really discouraging that and look at individuals and hold them accountable for their words and their actions. As far as our law enforcement is concerned, my understanding is that we have staffing issues, and we have a scarcity of adequate training resources. And so if we were able to support our police departments by giving them the training resources that they need and that they've asked for, and then addressing the fact that we want the best people applying to be our law enforcement, because this is quite a responsibility. It's a position of authority. When you don't have the best talent coming in, then it opens the door to all kinds of potentially bad actors that then, when they have that position of authority, are likely to abuse it. And so, and that's not, you're not going to get the best people coming forward and wanting to be a part of a profession that is roundly criticized and condemned, and where everyone is painted with the same broad brush. So I think that understanding that our law enforcement, our police departments serve a really important role. And people who live in high crime neighborhoods would really know this. They've lived it. And understanding that each person should be held accountable for his or her own actions, good and bad, that's really the mindset that we should have moving forward. And that's all I'd like to add to that.
Thanks, Meg. back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the environmental movement got started with a concern about pollution and a lack of regard for the environment. And of course, in recent years and decades, it's been a concern about CO2 and global warming, which has resulted in various kinds of land use regulations and new land use regulations piling upon the old ones, as Mike alluded to a moment ago. What do you think is key to striking the right balance between legitimate concern about pollution and also protecting economic development?
I think that this fight, this conflict between supporting economic development and taking care of the environment, I think it's a false opposition, and I don't see why we should have to, have them come at odds with one another. I think that's really, really not the right mentality. We can boost economic development and economic growth while also making sure that our airways, waterways, soil, our land is conserved and does not turn into a wasteland. So you're minimizing the pollution, and we can do both. And in fact, now, as we all know, we don't live in Victorian England, right? We don't, where all the the chimneys and the factories are billowing black smoke. We don't live in that world. Why? Because we have 21st century technology that allows us to have manufacturing and production without polluting our world that we live in. And so I think the mindset should be, well, let's try and make sure that we, and this is the Vermont way really, conserve and make sure that everything is clean and pollution free, but at the same time, this entire hour that we've discussed about, supporting businesses and upward mobility and having that economic growth, we can have both of them come together. And so that means tax reform, cutting regulations, allowing the private sector to flourish, and we can have both of them together.
Well, thank you. This has been quite an edifying discussion. And now I'd like to give each of the candidates a moment or two to summarize what they'd most like you, the voter, to know as you consider who you're going to pull a lever for on November 3rd for the Vermont State Senator from Bennington County. Mike, would you like to begin?
Sure. Well, I hope folks today got a little bit of an idea as to where I stand on most of the issues that may be important to them. The one thing that I think is important and people need to understand that if you send me to Montpelier, I'm going to do what I think is the right thing for the people of the county. And that may not make me very popular with some people. Certainly as law enforcement, again, I always did the right thing at the right time for the right reasons. But at the end of the day, there's one person that I need to satisfy, and that's myself. And I will always do what I believe is right. And with that, I'm not afraid of offending people. I'm not afraid of somebody getting upset with me if I don't agree with them. That's what makes this country is what it is that, it's a democracy and we should have different opinions. Fact is, I have more different opinions than, some people would have. My wife's my biggest critic. And, so I don't expect to satisfy everyone. But what I will say to you is this, is that I think I've got a really good bearing on what needs to happen here. And I think I've got a really good sense of common sense. And I've always taken it upon myself to think things through, listen to people, because, oftentimes you'll end up with a mindset, and then after listening to people, you see a different way. And I always say to myself, I'll get as much information I can before I make a decision. And if I don't have that information, I'll wait until I do. And the other thing about me is, I don't act hastily. Sometimes the best action is no action. And I learned that in law enforcement. And, sometimes it's best to wait the storm out or step aside until, when you're on the ropes, it's not the time to be making major decisions. And, I've told some folks early on in this campaign, we're in the middle of a storm here, economically and otherwise, with this whole COVID thing. This is not the time to be making major decisions at the legislative level. And if I was in Montpelier, I would be one of the people saying we should not be making any new laws until we come out of the storm. And hopefully that gives you the kind of idea gives you an idea of the kind of mindset that I use for making decisions, and it would be in your line of thinking, then you'll send me to Montpelier. If not, I'll go to Florida and enjoy the sun during the winter.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks.
Meg, would you give us your closing statement, please?
Thank you, Lawrence, for moderating, Mike for participating, and Cat TV for having us. My name is Meg Hansen. Why? I don't need to say that.
Well,
People
go
know
ahead.
that.
You
Just
do.
for the
But you need to remind people your name. Why not?
Okay. Bennington County deserves fresh and dynamic representation in the Vermont Senate. We need a bold new vision and innovative solutions to build a resilient and prosperous future for all. I firmly believe in the power and dignity of labor. It is critical that we restore the importance of work in our society, and we can do this by helping more Vermonters participate in different forms of productive labor. As your next state senator, I will advocate for policies that enable more Vermonters to work in the skilled trades and as entrepreneurs, boost economic growth, and create upwardly mobile jobs while minimizing pollution, bring down the cost of health insurance, expand access to high-quality, affordable health care, empower parents and students to improve K-12 learning outcomes, and this includes supporting parents who wish to homeschool and expand school choice to all Vermont towns, and finally, remedy the culture of despair and addiction that has consumed too many of our towns and families. I believe that these policies will enable more young people, professionals, middle class and working class families to build prosperous lives here in Vermont. Together, we will recover from this pandemic and move toward creating a resilient and prosperous future for all Vermonters. I ask for your vote in the November 3rd general election to represent Bennington County in the Vermont Senate. Thank you.
Thank you, Meg. I'd like to thank you for your kind attention during this hour. I hope that you enjoyed hearing from Meg Hansen and Mike Hall as much as I did, giving their well thought out answers to questions that are vital to the future success of the citizenry and the county of Bennington. But I want to remind you again, if you love both Mike and Meg, don't despair. You can vote for both of them on November 3rd. I encourage you to turn out and vote and make your voice heard. Again, my name is Lawrence Zupan, thanking you for being with us today. Goodbye.